They told us monsters weren't real, that myths were just stories to keep us up at night. But what if they were wrong? Buried in a forgotten attic, locked away in an ancient chest, and hidden deep within the shadows of my family's history lies impossible journals. Journals that whisper secrets humanity was never meant to know. Inside these pages are accounts of creatures that lurk just beyond the edge of our understanding, beasts, legends, horrors that defy explanation. What you're about to hear are not wise tales. They're not stories. It's evidence. Welcome to Project Black Garden, a Monsters and Myths podcast. Season 1, The Oleander Files, where the lines between myth and reality vanish, and the truth is far scarier than fiction. But be warned, someone once told me that once you've seen the monsters, they've seen you too. My name is Michael. Let's begin. Since this is the first episode in this podcast, I should probably start with a little backstory. And that story starts with a key. I was your typical human. You know, work hard, play hard. Always in search of the next great dive bar. Or enjoy a classic international football game whenever I could. But then one fateful day, everything changed. My father passed away. Nothing crazy, just the usual life, throwing a monkey wrench into your everyday plans. But what was earth-shattering, life-changing in fact, was what my dad had left behind for me. A single gold key with the number 13 scratched into one of its sides. And what did this key unlock? Well, the key to a lockbox that had a half dozen journals in it. Surprisingly, none of them belonged to my dad. They were his uncle's property. My great uncle, Samuel. Apparently, my father had attained them when he died suddenly in a nasty plane crash in Nebraska a long time ago. My father was the only family left, and he inherited what little his uncle had kept. So my great uncle was kind of like an enigma in my family. My dad used to tell me stories about his military days. And apparently, those days were filled with black ops and secret missions. All the things Hollywood likes to make movies about. But we can get into that at a later date. For now, let's talk about the journals. They're mostly handwritten with some old-fashioned typed up pages. Hand drawings adorn many of the pages, and they were drawn by my great uncle, who was known to be quite the artist. There's lots of dates and locations throughout the world scattered across these pages. Even a handful of old photographs that have been ravaged by time in the wear of being locked away for 50 plus years. And most surprising of all, 10 hours of audio. As for the journal's pages, what's on them? Well, fellow listener, that's why I started this podcast. To share what I have found. To share my family's history. And unfortunately, the world's darkest secrets. All the journals are stamped in black ink that reads, Project Black Garden. Handwritten underneath that, in what I assume is my great uncle's handwriting, were 3 words. The Oleander Files. Now, I'd like to tell you that these journals were filled with collections of flowers and soil preservation tips, but they were not. Instead, they're highly detailed notes, secret evidence that all our myths, all our horror stories, just might be true. Apparently, Black Garden was a secret project that detailed government and black op operations that dealt with supernatural myths and monsters. And they divvied up the garden into different sections or files. Now I have 5 other journals for a total of 6, all filled with secrets designated by different flower gardens for each journal. I hear there's more out there, similar to other covert activities the government ran by different names, like Project Blue Book or Operation Paperclip. There was even one that they made a famous movie about called The Manhattan Project. And according to my uncle's journals, one particular general really liked flowers. Now, I know that's crazy, and it's been hard to deal with what I now know is the truth. I've actually been warned by a family friend who's a lawyer to not come forward with these journals. My family has even broke down begging me not to go through with this podcast. They think it puts a target on my family, and especially myself. So that's why I've decided to change all the names that you'll hear during any of these episodes. I'm even changing mine. I'm hoping one day I can come out and show you who I am, but for right now I can't. The only thing I'm not changing is my great uncle's name. He deserves to be known. I always believed that he was a hero, but after what I know now, he was so much more than that. So, Uncle Samuel, this is for you. And with that, we will start episode 1 with a direct quote from my Uncle Sam. This is file number 311 from the Oleander files. They told me to stay silent, to keep what I know buried deep in the shadows of these woods. But the truth, it won't stay hidden, not forever. Be warned, what you're about to hear will change the way you see the world, mysteries, forever. But the best advice that I can give you is run. This is the hidden truth about Bigfoot. For decades, the legend of Bigfoot has captured imaginations as a reclusive, misunderstood creature of the wild. But what if we've been wrong all along? According to my uncle's files, there's a more sinister, shadowy side to the Bigfoot lore. The accounts that never make the headlines. Forgotten heroes who escape their encounters speak of aggression, bloodshed, and an intelligence far more sinister than folklore suggests. From the remote forests of the Pacific Northwest to isolated cabins in the Appalachia, stories of disappearances, mutilated animals, and unexplainable violence have been quietly buried. The story I'm about to tell you leads me to believe that Bigfoot is much more than just a gentle giant. These creatures can be very territorial, predatory, but most surprisingly of all, they're killers. All right, let's get some specifics out of the way. Bigfoot is known by different names also as Sasquatch, a legendary creature from North American folklore, often described as a large, hairy, bipedal humanoid. Its name actually originated in the 20th century and became a popular term in the media for describing sightings of the creature. Its appearance is typically described as being anywhere from 6 to 10 feet and even up to 15 feet tall, covered in dark brown or reddish hair, sometimes black, and weighing between 500 to 1,000 pounds. Some witnesses often note a strong, unpleasant odor associated with the creature, and some have even said they actually smell good. The creature's name comes from the reports of large footprints measuring up to 24 inches long, if not a little longer, and 6 to 8 inches wide. Some even have visible dermal ridges. Now, most people think because they've never seen one in real life, that Bigfoot is reclusive, shy, and likes to avoid human interaction. They say they have strange vocalizations, usually to warn us, tree knocking, and a lot of times rock throwing. These are all forms of their communication. They're actually all warnings. Many Native American tribes have long histories of stories about large mysterious creatures resembling Bigfoot. But most of us are probably more familiar with the infamous 1967 Patterson-Gimlin film purportedly showing a Bigfoot in Northern California. It's one of the most famous pieces of alleged evidence for Bigfoot. And to this day, people still argue, is it fake or was it real? I have an answer for that as well. Publicly, no verified physical remains have ever been found of a real live Bigfoot. At least that's what we've been told. Now, my great uncle Sam was part of a very secret military team. And as I mentioned earlier in the episode, I would be changing all names, dates, and locations for my protection and my family's protection, all except my great uncle's name. So, without further ado, this is my uncle's story about Bigfoot. Now, my great uncle has had over a dozen encounters with the legendary Bigfoot, but none of them affected him the way the first time he and his team unfortunately discovered just how real the legend is. Squad number 7734, or as my great uncle referred to it as Team Hell, had just settled in for their first night in the Northern Pacific countryside. They were on the edge of a clearing. They had just finished patrolling and sweeping the area for all the things that go bump in the night. A standard weekend for he and his crew. Now, initially, when they went to bed, they would do it in shifts. 3 would stay awake, patrol, keep an eye on everything, while the other 3 caught up on much needed rest. This night, my great uncle Sam, his best friend Bowie, and the youngest of the team, Playboy, had already turned in for the night, while Zero, Scotch, and Rev took the first shift from midnight to 3. Zero was the oldest of the squad, and my uncle's least favorite. They butted heads over politics, religion, and just what they were out there to do. But at the end of the day, they had each other's backs and respected each other for their talents. Scotch, well, he got his nickname because he enjoyed a good drink every now and then. But he was a hell of a soldier. Quick-witted, strong, and was usually the first one in to a firefight. Rev, he was kind of the spiritual leader of this ragtag crew, always reminding the men of their prayers and that there was something bigger out there than them. Always trying to make sense of the crazy stuff they had seen and dealt with in the past. According to my great uncle's notes, he considered Rev the best of all 6 of them. So Zero, Scotch, and Rev were in a triangle formation that covered the entire area. About an hour into the shift, my Uncle Sam was awoken by somebody screaming. Playboy, the youngest of the team, was the first one out, followed quickly by Zero. Now, Playboy was young, headstrong, and was always ready for a good time, especially with the ladies. He was also trigger happy. Bowie apparently was just like my uncle. They were often referred to as brothers because they shared the same mannerisms, the same bad dad jokes, and a love for baseball. Heck, it's noted that they even laughed the same way. But he and my uncle both chased Playboy as fast as they could to get to the screaming. Before he even had a chance to wipe the crud from his eyes, the screaming turned to gunshots. The night lit up in pops of orange and white flashes as half his team unloaded into the wilderness. By the time my uncle and his teammates reached the chaos in the trees, there was only 3 members still standing. It was Scotch. And he was shaking and covered in blood, and he whipped around to my uncle and said, "It just came out of the trees. It just came out of the trees. It was watching us." My uncle surveyed the area, which was now coated in blood. Lying 15 yards away from Scotch was Zero's body, which now didn't have a head. I guess that's not exactly right. According to these notes, his head had been smashed in. At first, they thought it was a rock that would have done it because it was completely pulverized. There was nothing left. But they would find that that was not the truth. Just in front of them was Rev, who was now separated from his lower half. He appeared to still be alive and in shock, but could not speak. Bloody tears were running from his eyes as he clung to the cross that dangled from his neck. Just as soon as he tried to reach out for my uncle, he passed away. My uncle said it took everything he had to not get sick in that moment. And as he turned back to Scotch, he asked him what the hell happened here. And Scotch, who was still shaking, pointed down to a tree just off into the distance. At the base of that tree was Bigfoot. It had been shot a half dozen times, shoulder, chest, stomach, and it looked like through one of its legs. But it was still alive. And watching the last 4 men with intense yet very intelligent eyes, with an aggressive grunt, Scotch reloaded his weapon and was ready to shoot it again. My uncle demanded to know what happened. Scotch looked down at the ground, trying his best not to cry, when he said, "Zero saw some movement in the trees, and before any of them could react, the Bigfoot had already launched itself onto Zero and smashed his head in with its bare hands. As Scotch and Rev turned their guns on him, it moved so fast into the darkness and the shadows that they weren't sure if they were even shooting in the right direction. Moments later, Scotch said he turned around to reload, and as he did, the Bigfoot had already had Rev in the air above its head, holding him like a wrestler in a tag team match. Rev screamed for help to Scotch and to God, and in a blink of an eye, the Bigfoot had torn him into 2 pieces and dropped him to the ground. And that's when Scotch was able to put a handful of bullets into its chest. He said he fell back immediately, and then that's when the rest of them had ran up. He said this couldn't have taken more than 45 seconds. Bowie was seething and took a step forward to finish off the beast, but my uncle stopped him. Uncle Sam said, "The beast didn't look evil. It didn't look like it was here to hurt them." He said once they were actually able to get a good look at its face, it looked sorry. He said it looked terrified. Slowly, my uncle kneeled down right before it, as Bowie and Playboy warned him not to. Then the Bigfoot reached out a bloody hand. Not to hurt my uncle, but as if to say, "Help." My uncle touched its forearm, settling its arm onto its chest. My uncle could see just how big this creature was. He said it had to at least be 8 feet tall, 600 pounds easy. It was much thicker and had much more muscle mass than he had heard stories about. But when he touched its arm, He said it didn't feel like a beast. It didn't feel like a monster. He said it felt human. Suddenly, a gasp escaped its throat. Almost like a dirty wheeze is how my uncle wrote it down. He leaned in, knowing this was probably the final moments of this beast. The creature leaned forward and in a gurgly whisper said one word. Ega. Now my uncle at first thought it was just making a noise and that it hadn't just spoke. Ega. He turned to look at Bowie as if to say, what the hell did it just say? And that's when Scotch pulled the trigger, burying one final bullet into the forehead of the great beast. It died immediately, and just as quickly, he spit on the beast, turned around, and called headquarters for help. Now my great uncle doesn't say what else happened that night in that clearing, other than as they waited for their team to be extracted, they wrapped up their 2 teammates for proper burial back home, and no one said a word. He thinks most of them were in shock. Back at an undisclosed base on the outskirts of northern Oregon, what was left of Squad 7734 were debriefed by the general, or as they secretly referred to as the gardener. When they were done with the debriefing, they all had to go have psych evals, standard protocol. But just as my great uncle was getting ready to leave, the general pulled him aside and asked, "So now you know they can talk?" My uncle didn't say anything, and the general smiled with this crooked smile. And he says, "It means leave." My uncle asked, "What?" He said, "Ega." That's an old Cherokee word that means go or to leave, go away. The general added that they're much smarter and have been here a lot longer than people realize. My uncle took a moment and asked the general, "So what do we do now?" The general let out a hearty laugh and said, "Soldier, we kill them all." My uncle hated his answer, but it did explain why it's so hard to come by a real live Bigfoot. Public enemy number 1. Within 48 hours, my uncle said they had 2 new recruits, Johnny and Maximilian, and they moved on to their next adventure. Now, according to some of his final notes, most of the sightings these days, or at least the sightings from the 60s and 70s, and a few in the 80s, they were all fake. The government was actually behind those. The Patterson film, they were hired to do that. Because the best way to control a secret is misinformation. Now, there's been plenty of new footage and new sightings since the 80s. And I can't say how many of those are actually real. But now you know. Now, in this file, my uncle did sketch what he saw that night. He sketched the scene around him, Rev's body, the trees, the Bigfoot at the base of the largest one, where it had died, with minor details, like approximate height, weight, and how many bullets and what kind of ammo was used to take it down, how long the event actually took. But the curious thing about his sketch was most of it looked unfinished or rushed. All except one particular part of the image, the face of the Bigfoot, especially the eyes. It looked like he had spent hours and hours putting detail into that face. I would assume it was burned into his memory. And if I were to just show you this image, your first thought would be, that thing has a soul. Because in those eyes, you can see humanity. Now, like I said, my uncle had at least a dozen more Bigfoot encounters in his lifetime, but he doesn't speak of them too much. Or at least he wasn't able to document those as well as this one. But I don't think any of them affected him like this one did. To see the carnage that the creature had caused, but the idea that maybe, just maybe, it was protecting its home. How many of us would do anything different? He ends this file with, "I know that night I saw a true monster, but I also think I saw what makes us human. And sometimes I don't know, with the things we have done, are we the monsters?" As we come to the end of this first episode, I just wanted everyone to know thank you for taking this journey with me. I hope this is the first of many. I'm not going to lie, I'm nervous about putting some of this out there. But hey, it's out there now. I personally would like to know if any of you have had any encounters with Bigfoot or any monsters. I want to hear your story. I want to believe your story. I want you to know this is a safe place for your story. So leave me a message on any of the streaming apps where you've listened to this, or drop me an email at pbgharvest@gmail.com. Look out for episode 2. It's going to be on one of my favorite myths, the mysterious and deadly skinwalkers. And remember, listener, monsters are real. Though sometimes I've discovered that they're very, very human.